In the mountains of western Virginia, where fog dances between centenary pines and time itself seems to have stopped around 1920, there exists a place America preferred to forget. Odd, a small rural community in the Appalachians, has become synonymous with a taboo absolute in modern society: generations of marriages between direct relatives. Flanked by rusty trailers and wooden houses that defy the laws of gravity, the narrow, irregular dirt road leading to the Whittaker family property seems to repel modern life. Kilometers before your destination, GPS stops operating, as if technology itself refuses to acknowledge this place's existence. It was in 2020 that photographer and documentary filmmaker Mark Leiter ventured into these mountains, a camera in hand and a haunting question on his mind: how can an entire family survive decades of consanguineous marriages? The reality he found challenges any fiction. The Whittaker family is not merely an isolated case of consanguinity. They represent the extreme result of generations of geographical isolation, absolute poverty, and traditions perpetuated for over a century. Ray, Lorraine, Timmy, and Freddie Whittaker are brothers who carry in their bodies and minds the physical and mental marks of a genetic lineage closed in on itself. The eldest brother, Ray, has severe physical malformations. His head is disproportionately small in relation to his body, a condition known as microcephaly. Communicating only through grunts and gestures, his intellectual capacity is severely compromised. The only sister, Lorraine, has obvious facial deformities and motor difficulties that prevent her from walking normally. Though able to speak some words, Timmy has a severe intellectual disability. His face carries the unmistakable marks of consanguinity, facial asymmetry, serious dental problems, and an empty look that reveals decades of social isolation. The youngest, Freddie, is the only one who can maintain basic conversations, but even he shows clear signs of cognitive impairment. What shocks most are not just the visible physical deformities, but the naturalness with which this family accepts their condition. For them, this is the only reality they have ever known. There are no mirrors in the house. No television shows them other families. No references from the outside world allow them to understand how profoundly different they are. The house where they live is a heap of rooms without electric light, without running water, without any modern comfort. A smell of mold and abandonment impregnates every corner. In the backyard, piles of trash accumulated for years create mountains of debris, making it impossible to determine where the garbage ends and their personal belongings begin. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because this is one of the most extreme and documented stories of consanguinity ever recorded in the United States, and you will not find details like these anywhere else. To understand how the Whittaker family reached this point, we must return to the 19th century, when the first settlers settled in the isolated mountains of western Virginia. The Appalachian region has always been characterized by extreme geographical isolation. Entire communities formed in deep valleys separated by insurmountable mountains and kilometers of dense forest. Brutal and merciless, the geography of this region features mountains that rise abruptly over 1,200 meters, creating narrow, isolated valleys where small communities have developed their own culture, language, and traditions over generations. During winter, snowfall can isolate these communities completely for months, forcing families to depend exclusively on themselves. Dr. Spencer Wells, a geneticist specializing in isolated populations, explains that when small groups are geographically isolated for generations, the genetic pool becomes progressively more limited. What happened in the Appalachians is a classic example of genetic drift in small founding populations, Wells states in his research published in the Journal of Medical Genetics in 2018. He goes on to explain the concept of a population bottleneck. When a population is dramatically reduced and remains isolated, it loses available genetic diversity, creating a vicious cycle that eventually leads to mandatory consanguinity. The documented history of the Appalachians is full of similar examples. Since 1887, the Whittaker family has had its roots documented in the region, when John Whittaker settled in Odd with his wife, Sarah. American census records show that in the second generation, marriages began to occur between first-degree cousins. By the third generation, marriages between siblings and half-sisters had become a common practice, not by choice, but from an absolute lack of options. Preserved in Charleston's historic library, the archives of the local Methodist Church reveal disturbing details about how these unions were religiously formalized. Reverend Samuel Morrison, who served the community between 1920 and 1945, kept meticulous records. His personal diaries, discovered in 2019, contain passages describing his growing concern with the irregular unions he was forced to bless. In an entry dated June 23, 1934, Morrison writes, "Today I performed the wedding of Mary Whittaker to her own brother, Henry. The girl is only 16 years old and already carries visible signs of mental disabilities. Henry is not much better. Both are children of a union between father and daughter. Divine blessing." For years, these entries continue, documenting progressively more problematic marriages, with Morrison recording at least 12 unions between first-degree relatives in the Whittaker family between 1930 and 1940. The isolation was not only geographical, it was cultural, religious, and economic. Belonging to a fundamentalist religious sect that views the outer world as sinful and corrupt, the Whittaker family saw marrying outside not only as impractical but as a betrayal of family and religious values. This sect, known locally as the Church of the Elect, developed a peculiar theology that justified and even encouraged consanguineous marriages. The genetic consequences began to speak loudly in the fourth generation. Medical records from Charleston General Hospital show that between 1920 and 1950, at least 15 Whittaker children were born with severe disabilities, 8 of whom died before the age of 5. Prolonged consanguinity results in what geneticists call inbreeding depression. Deleterious recessive genes that would usually remain inactive become dominant when both parents carry the same genetic mutations. Genetic analyses performed by Dr. Michael Bamshad of the University of Washington revealed that the brothers today have a consanguinity coefficient of 0.355, meaning they are genetically closer than would be possible even for normal siblings. This indicates their parents were themselves the result of multiple consanguineous relationships, Dr. Bamshad explains. A coefficient of 0.375 is extraordinarily high. For comparison, the children of normal siblings would have a coefficient of 0.25. What we see in the Whittakers suggests at least 3 consecutive generations of very close relatives coupling. This level of consanguinity results in extreme homozygosity, a condition where virtually all deleterious recessive genes express themselves simultaneously. Dr. Sarah Martinez of Johns Hopkins describes the situation as a perfect example of the worst possible scenarios of human genetics. She continues, "What we see in the Whittakers is essentially the human equivalent of a highly endogamic laboratory lineage. They have accumulated so many deleterious mutations that it is a miracle they survived to adulthood." Detailed genetic tests revealed the Whittaker brothers carry at least 23 different recessive mutations in a homozygous state, all expressed simultaneously. The physical malformations are just the tip of the iceberg. Congenital heart problems, partial deafness, chronic kidney issues, and a compromised immune system are part of their daily reality. Ray suffers from severe epilepsy. Lorraine has respiratory problems that make her constantly gasp for air. Paradoxically, these 4 siblings are the survivors. Church documents indicate at least 7 other siblings were stillborn or died in childhood. The perpetuation of consanguinity cannot be understood as mere individual choice. It is the result of a complex system of isolation, poverty, and ignorance that has been self-perpetuating for over a century. Betty Whittaker, a distant cousin who escaped in the 1970s, offers a shocking account. "No one explained anything to anyone," she told documentary filmmaker Mark Leiter. "The girls got pregnant with their own brothers, parents, or uncles, and that was seen as normal." Betty describes disturbing family rituals, like the blessing of purity ceremony where the patriarch would assign a male relative as a girl's guardian at age 14, granting him exclusive reproductive rights. Resistance was met with severe punishment. Betty's sister, Rebecca, had her legs broken with a hammer after her 3rd escape attempt. If you also feel the weight of this story, comment now. How does a society allow this to happen for so many generations? Formal education never existed for the current Whittakers. They never attended school. Their only knowledge of the world comes from equally isolated relatives. Most tragically, the cycle continues. Freddie has had relationships with first-degree cousins, resulting in 1 child who died in infancy and another miscarriage. Dr. Robin Bennett explains that at such consanguinity coefficients, the likelihood of severe birth defects exceeds 50%. Living exclusively on about $800 a month in government benefits, the family depends on charity. My first reaction was pure shock, Leiter admits. But then came the realization that a family in such extreme conditions remained invisible to authorities for so long. The answer reveals deep systemic failures. Internal documents from the Department of Social Services show local authorities were aware for decades but consciously chose to ignore the situation, treating it as an intractable problem. The educational system also failed completely. This negligence exposes the hypocrisy of a society proud of its family values but which abandons those who don't fit normative standards. The history of the Whittaker family transcends sensationalism. It speaks to American rural poverty, institutional negligence, and the systematic abandonment of marginalized populations. Subsequent studies reveal the Whittakers are not an isolated case in Appalachia. What makes their case unique is not the consanguinity itself, but the extreme duration and the complete absence of external intervention, explains Bamshad. Media attention, while bringing some minor improvements, also turned them into a morbid attraction, raising complex ethical questions. They are literally the last of their species, a family that has reproduced to extinction, one observer noted. But their story serves as a warning. In the poorest rural regions, thousands of families live in conditions of extreme vulnerability. Dr. Williams, a social anthropologist, notes the Whittakers are not an anomaly but the extreme result of social trends that affect thousands of families in the region. They represent the most severe point of a spectrum of social neglect. The true lesson of the Whittaker family is not in their deformed genetics, but in what their existence reveals about the deep failures of a society that refuses to care for its most vulnerable. They are an uncomfortable mirror reflecting our own moral and social deformities. Dr. Bennett offers a dark perspective. From a purely scientific point of view, the Whittaker family represents what happens when natural selection is artificially suspended. What kept them alive were not their genes, but government aid and charity. Today, as you watch this story comfortably at home, the Whittaker brothers remain in their home without electricity, without hope, and without a future. They are ghosts of an America we prefer to pretend does not exist. The Whittaker family will die in silence, as they lived. But their history remains a permanent testimony to what happens when a society decides some lives do not matter enough to be saved. Their lives are a question directed at our collective conscience. If a society is judged by how it treats its most vulnerable members, what does the existence of the Whittaker family say about who we really are? If you are not subscribed yet, subscribe now, because stories like this reveal truths few have the courage to tell. If you've watched this far, you appreciated this story. Leave a comment saying I watched here so I can get to know you and see who really follows the channel. Leave a like if this story impacted you in any way. Share this video so that more people understand the realities our society prefers to ignore.